Hello everyone, today we're looking at a brutal and gripping Western cannibal film called Bone Tomahawk, which is hailed as one of the best hardcore westerns in recent years. In the early 1990s American West, two bandits were robbing in the desert. They slit the throats of sleeping travelers, then searched them for money. Suddenly, one of the bandits heard the sound of hoofbeats. It seemed like a patrol was approaching. Not wanting to end up in jail, they quickly ran into the nearby mountains. From the mountains came a chilling cry, and on the rocks was carved a warning sign that said "Do not enter," but they didn't stop, not until they saw skeletons hanging from trees.
Maybe we should be going someplace that looks like a burial ground.
Not to a bunch of godless savages. Ain't no concern of a civilized man.
The younger bandit felt uneasy, but the older one insisted on going further. In the very next second, the older bandit met a violent end. The remaining bandit panicked and fled, hiding for 11 days before finally reaching a small town. Still shaken with fear, he quickly buried the stolen money under a tree. But this scene was witnessed by the town's deputy, Chicory. Chicory thought he looked suspicious, so he returned to the station and reported to Sheriff Hunt. When Hunt found the bandit, he was drinking in the town saloon to calm his nerves. Hunt asked his name, and after a slight hesitation, the bandit gave the name of the older bandit. Hunt had never heard such a sloppy lie. When he reached for his gun, the bandit panicked.
Like I just told you, I ain't got no weapon, because you put him in that hole, you know.
Hunt shot him down, and after all his running, he still ended up in jail. Hunt didn't have evidence to convict him, so he could only hold him as a suspect and sent Bruder to fetch the doctor. The town had only one doctor, a woman whose husband had broken his leg after falling from the roof, leaving him unable to move for a long time. She was looking after him, and their time together was rekindling their relationship. Just as the intimate mood was being set, the doorbell rang. Bruder was outside, explaining the situation. Learning it was only to remove a bullet from a suspect's leg, Samantha quickly packed her equipment and went to the station. But when she saw the suspect, she realized his condition was serious. Not only had he been shot in the leg, but he also had a high fever and needed overnight care. Hunt ordered a young deputy to stay at the jail and assist Samantha, while the others went home to rest. Little did they know, the ones who had killed the older bandit were cannibals. They wouldn't give up their meal, and they had tracked the scent to the town. Eerie cries echoed through the streets, but no one paid attention. At the same time, the stableman heard noises from the barn. He took a lantern to check, and in the darkness, he saw several strange figures. The stableman froze in fear for just a moment, and danger struck. The next day, people discovered his body, lying on the ground with his stomach ripped open. All the horses in the barn had vanished. Even more terrifying, the jail was also broken into by force. Samantha, the young deputy, and the bandit suspect were gone, leaving only a native sword hanging on the wall. Arthur had waited all night for his wife, only to receive the devastating news of her disappearance. Hunt believed native people had kidnapped the doctor and the others, so he called in an expert to help identify the origin of the sword. The expert told Hunt that only one group hunted with such weapons. They had no tribal name and no language of their own, and scholars referred to them as troglodytes. The expert knew where they lived, but he refused to guide Hunt there. Arthur mocked him, saying, "You're afraid of your own kind," but the expert said,
The spoiled bloodline of inbred animals right beneath their own mothers.
It turned out the troglodytes, though resembling natives, were a completely different race. For them, humans were food, and women were merely tools for reproduction. Once they gave birth, they were slaughtered as meat. The expert's people had long marked the troglodytes' land as forbidden, a place known as the Valley of the Starving. Troglodytes were extremely territorial, and anyone who entered their land would be hunted down to the ends of the earth. Even knowing the danger, Hunt insisted on going to rescue them, so the expert reluctantly gave him a map. Sharing Hunt's resolve were Samantha's husband Arthur, along with Chicory and Bruder. Thus, the four-man rescue team was formed. They set off with food, weapons, and Samantha's medical kit, planning to cover 5 days of travel in only 3. For Arthur, with his injured leg, it was extremely difficult, as he even needed help just to get off his horse. The others advised him to stay and wait for news, but Arthur, driven by love for his wife, insisted on joining the rescue mission. By nightfall of the first day, they found a spot to camp. Hunt and Chicory prepared the fire and meal, while Bruder set up a ring of wires with bells around the camp. He told the others it was for safety. The other 3 thought he was overreacting. Chicory accused him of overstepping.
You watch how you speak to the law. Sheriff especially. You ain't captain.
But Bruder sharply defended himself.
We're the most intelligent man here, and I intend to keep us alive.
You're the most
most intelligent man here. Is that a fact?
It is. Sheriff Hunt has a wife. So does Mr. O'Dwyer. And you're a widower.
Yeah. What has that got to do with anything?
Smart men don't get married.
Whether the reason was good or not, they stopped trying to stop him. After dinner, the four of them lay down on their narrow mats to sleep. Only the occasional sound of idle chatter and the crackling fire filled the night. Suddenly, the sharp ring of a bell sounded. By the time Hunt and Chicory reacted, Bruder had already dealt with the intruder. Listening to the heavy breathing of a beast in the darkness, they realized just how careless they had been. The next day, they continued on their journey. At a small stream, they refilled their flasks. Arthur strayed away from the group, which made Chicory suspicious, and he immediately reported to Hunt. The cautious Bruder lifted his binoculars and saw Arthur shooting a snake, then collapsing in pain as he treated his injured leg. It turned out that after a day of forced marching, his leg had swollen and grown infected. Fearing rejection, he had tried to secretly treat his wound. When he returned to the group, Hunt stopped him and confiscated his morphine. Hunt wasn't accusing him of anything, but rather, he saw Arthur was inexperienced and worried his methods would make things worse. It was better to let the more experienced Chicory take care of him. That evening, Bruder scouted out a camp with his binoculars. Chicory rebandaged Arthur's leg, but the results were poor. Having served as a battlefield medic, Chicory could tell even without instruments that the infection had turned into gangrene. Without immediate treatment, amputation would be necessary. But in that era, the survival rate of amputation was tragically low. Just then, two strangers approached their camp. The two strangers lit matches to show goodwill and threw away their guns. But when they touched the bell, Bruder immediately fired. Hunt and Chicory were baffled. The strangers had already posed no threat. So why did Bruder still shoot?
Men were scouts for raiding party or thieves.
You don't know that. And I wanted to get information from them in any case.
They wouldn't have told you the correct year, much less anything else.
Relying only on his own suspicion, he had taken two innocent lives. For the first time, Hunt showed anger. He had ways to interrogate strangers without spilling blood, but Bruder refused to back down. Since their camp had been exposed, the place was no longer safe. They needed to move to a more secure location and could not risk lighting a fire, so they quickly packed their gear and found a spot backed by a hillside. There, they could finally rest. Yet as they fell asleep, bandits came. Bruder's caution proved correct, but they were still ambushed. He was stabbed in the shoulder, and their horses were stolen. Bruder couldn't believe it, for his horse was loyal and intelligent, and would never ride off with a thief. Arthur pointed him to a direction. Bruder walked slowly over and saw his horse lying in the grass, dying. With his own hand, he ended his beloved steed's suffering. A heavy mood settled over them, but the rescue mission had to go on. Without horses, they were forced to continue on foot. Time was running short. With only 3 days left, they had to travel light, march both day and night, and avoid sleeping at night to prevent ambush. For Hunt and the others, this was hard but possible. For Arthur, it was nearly impossible, but he refused to withdraw. Faced with such determination, the others could not turn him away. On the third day, Arthur went ahead first. The others packed their gear and followed. When the morning sun lit up the desert, they caught up with Arthur. It was clear he couldn't keep up with their pace, so they agreed to mark the trail with 4 stones, allowing Arthur to follow. By afternoon, after marching in agony, Arthur finally found his companions resting in the shade. Beside them was a mat prepared for him. Exhausted, he collapsed onto it and quickly fell asleep, but he was soon woken by his companions. It was time to move again. This time, he hadn't regained his strength. Just scolding the reckless Bruder cost him his balance, and he fell heavily to the ground. The fall worsened his leg injury, making it impossible even to stand with a crutch.
You don't give me back my crutch! That leg can't be disregarded. Now you're staying put.
To hell with your authority and the way you've been doing things. You shouldn't have shot that drifter back in Bright Hope and got my wife involved, and Bruder shouldn't have executed them Mexicans and made it all worse.
After his outburst, he yielded to fate and agreed to Chicory's suggestion of surgery. The operation went smoothly, and under the effect of morphine, Arthur fell into unconsciousness. He was left behind as Hunt, Chicory, and Bruder pressed on. Not long after, they heard the familiar eerie cries. It meant the troglodytes were near. They raised their guns cautiously, but no attack came under the cover of night. Another day dawned, and they spotted hoofprints in the desert. From the shapes, they recognized the tracks as those of the stolen stable horses. Following the trail, they finally found the troglodytes' lair. Ignoring the warning carved on the rocks, they, like the bandits at the beginning, arrived at the entrance to the troglodytes' graveyard. Bruder went in first to scout. After his signal, Hunt and Chicory carefully followed, but while they believed they were hidden, watching the cave from the sparse grass, the troglodytes had already spotted them. They had underestimated the enemy's strength and were beaten without a chance to fight back. Rescuing anyone now seemed hopeless. Bruder's arm was shattered, and unable to accept becoming a cripple, he asked Hunt for dynamite. He planned to sacrifice himself to buy time for Hunt and Chicory to escape. Seeing Bruder's resolve, Hunt took Chicory and left without hesitation. As they retreated toward the edge of Forbidden Land, a thunderous explosion erupted behind them. In the deafening roar, Bruder gave his life. However, Hunt and Chicory did not escape. They fell into a troglodyte ambush. Dragged along the ground like prey, they were pulled toward the lair. On the way, Chicory saw Bruder's body and the corpse of a fallen troglodyte beside him. He felt some comfort, at least one life had been exchanged for another. At the foot of a cliff, the troglodytes let out their strange cries. When the cries ended, 2 ropes were thrown down from the cave above. They tied up Hunt and Chicory and hauled them into a prison inside the cave. The prison had 3 stone walls, and its front was sealed by wooden stakes. Inside, Samantha and the young deputy were indeed being held. The vicious bandit had long since become food for the troglodytes. Now it was feeding time again. They dragged the weakened young deputy out of the cell, stripped off his clothes, and twisted his arms back. Hunt never expected that instead of saving anyone, he would be forced to watch his subordinate eaten alive. He spoke frantically to the deputy, trying to ease his pain. The deputy, seeing Hunt, mentioned the bandit suspect. After reporting his last duty, he spoke of his brother. Receiving Hunt's promise, he closed his eyes to meet death. The deputy was butchered like food and devoured by the troglodytes. Faced with such a bloody scene, Hunt and Chicory sank into despair. Their only hope was Arthur. But could a man who could barely walk be considered a rescuer? Samantha could not help but curse them.
This is why frontier life is so difficult. Not because of the Indians or the elements, but because of the idiots.
I'm sorry, man.
We're sorry.
You're idiots!
But she had figured out the number of troglodytes. There were about 14 in total, 2 of them crippled, pregnant women. The true fighting force was 12 men, with 3 already dead. Only 9 remained. The more they killed, the higher Arthur's chance of saving them. So Hunt devised a plan. He pretended the bottle of morphine was liquor and tried to drink from it eagerly. The troglodytes, thinking it was something good, grabbed it to taste. Though they disliked the flavor, the amount they drank was enough to kill 2 of them. Now only 7 enemies remained. At that time, Arthur awoke from his stupor. Following the 4-stone trail, he slowly made his way forward, relying on morphine to numb the pain. He often drifted in and out of sleep, but that also made him more cautious than the others. One day, while resting under a slope, 2 troglodytes crept up to ambush him. Arthur reflexively fired back. His aim wasn't as sharp as Bruder's, but his luck seemed boundless, and his wits came alive. He recalled the troglodytes' strange cries and checked the throat of a corpse. There, he found a special bone whistle. He pocketed it and continued toward the Forbidden Grounds entrance. On the ground were Hunt's belongings, proof that going further was dangerous. So Arthur climbed upward. Using the whistle, he misled the troglodytes and ambushed them. As he drew closer to the lair, the troglodytes inside discovered Hunt's trick. They dragged the poisoned corpses to the prison, knocked Hunt unconscious, slashed open his belly, and shoved the bottle inside the wound. Hunt awoke in agony, horrified that the troglodytes had even learned how to use guns. He was shot through the stomach but fought back with all his strength. Arthur finally reached the prison, but Hunt had little time left. Determined to give his final strength, Hunt took a shotgun from Arthur. He watched Arthur, Samantha, and Chicory leave, then loaded the weapon. On the way out of the cave, Chicory saw the pregnant women Samantha had mentioned. Their stomachs were grotesquely swollen, their eyes blinded with wooden spikes, and their hands and feet mutilated, used as food by the males. Alive, yet suffering worse than death. With heavy hearts, Arthur, Samantha, and Chicory left the lair on guard. When they had walked far into the open plain, they heard 3 gunshots echo from the direction of the cave. They knew the troglodytes were finished. Though Bruder and Hunt had perished in the rescue, the town and its people could now live in peace. The story of Bone Tomahawk ended here. Its first half followed the classic rhythm of a western desolate landscapes, perilous journeys, and hard men facing off. But in the second half, when the cannibals appeared, terror and gore exploded on screen, mirroring the clash of civilization and savagery in the frontier. Especially the contrast between Samantha and the pregnant women was cruel enough to chill the blood. Yet the four men were all compelling in their own ways. Though different in character, they shared the courage, duty, and sacrifice of true Western heroes. If you love Westerns, this is one film you definitely can't miss. I'm a film enthusiast, thank you for watching, and see you next time.